This is Play-by-Playcast.
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
The podcast about play-by-play guys. For play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Welcome back into another edition of the pod, everybody. This is Play-by-Playcast. My name is Joel Godet. It's the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. If you'd like to interact with us, as always, you can find us on Twitter. We are at PxPcast, or I am at Joel Godet, Joelgodett. You can keep those interactions from last week coming as well. If you have any comments from last week's pod, we put out on Twitter our episode with Mick Gillespie of the Tennessee Smokies. He had talked about broadcasting superpowers and what your broadcasting superpower is, or what various people's broadcasting superpowers are. And that could be anything ranging from ability to storytell or use of their voice or knowledge of the game, etc. Got some good responses, including ability to forget numbers on the roster from the previous week's game. So if you've got any broadcast superpowers, keep those coming our way. It'll be interesting to see what people's different ideas are that they come up with. In the meantime, I don't want to have too much of a long intro today because it's a long episode in general. This week's guest from ESPN is Kevin Brown, formerly of the Syracuse Chiefs, AAA baseball affiliate of the Washington Nationals. Kevin has been there since 2011 when he graduated from Syracuse and went to work for Jason Benetti and worked as his number two for 4 or 5 years until Jason departed Syracuse and Kevin took over, and then worked about 2.5 years. 3 full seasons, and he left in late July this year as the voice of the Chiefs to take his full-time job at ESPN. And it's a fun conversation. We cover a wide range of topics related to broadcasting and not. We start way off topic. So word of warning there. If you're not a big fan of the musical Hamilton, you might want to fast forward through the first couple of minutes of the podcast. But it all kind of comes together because Kevin is a guy that has an insane amount of creativity. And that shows both in his on-air work, but also the stuff he's done in his career around his on-air work and kind of the YouTube video ideas and things that he and Jason did while they were with the Syracuse Chiefs. And I think that kind of permeates into their broadcasting as well. The way they talk, the things that they reference, and the references that they can make, and kind of the inside jokes you can make. But the way you can make a broadcast more interesting, more colorful, I think is something that we talked about broadcasting superpowers, something that Kevin really excels at, and he's going to talk about that a lot on the pod. But we'll get into preparation. We'll get into what it's like being part of an ESPN broadcast team. We'll get into Kevin running a 40-yard dash on television against one of the nation's best high school speedsters on the football gridiron. We'll talk some baseball as well and what it was like when he made his major league debut this summer for the Washington Nationals also. Pretty wide-ranging conversation with Kevin Brown, and again, it's a long one, so we'll jump right into it. KB joins us this week on Play-by-Playcast. How was Hamilton? Can we start there?
Oh, yeah, we can start there. So I had a glorious week because I saw Hamilton on Tuesday of last week as we record this, and then I saw Dear Evan Hansen on Wednesday.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did you get Ben Platt?
We did get Ben Platt. So a friend of yours and mine, Jason Benetti, came into the city for a day because
I'm going to hear about this, by the way, because every time his name pops up on the pod, I get a text.
I mean, his life isn't crazy enough that he's doing half the White Sox games and he's doing college football right now. So he decided, I'm going to fly into New York for a day and see Dear Evan Hansen before Ben Platt leaves. And then our mutual agent somehow has a connection to somebody in the show and got us backstage.
What?
So we were in the dressing room backstage, and I took a picture of Jason with Ben Platt. That is on Twitter. And, he was excited. Jason, not Ben Platt. Although I'm sure Ben was very excited as well.
Big White Sox fan.
Huge, yeah. Big. It has a framed Minnie Minoso photo in his dressing room.
Multi-time winner of Sox math.
Yeah. Ben is great at Sox math. Not so good at any of the other various games that they play. Kind of fails at Who Am I? He just keeps guessing Paul Konerko every week for some reason. But it was great. Hamilton's amazing. Have you seen it? Have you seen either of these shows?
I have not. Every time I come home, I go see a show, but not those. So I've missed out there. And then I've wanted to go to Chicago to see Hamilton. But tickets they're not astronomical, but they're still like, $200 a seat, unless you get them like 3 months in advance, and then they're like $60 in the balcony, which makes sense. But I don't plan that far enough in advance. Right. So I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow, let alone in January.
I had to plan this far in advance to see Hamilton. I bought tickets for Hamilton the day after the presidential election in 2016.
Was there a reason? Like you were feeling patriotic?
No, there were two reasons. One is that the day after the election, I think it's safe to say I live in Brooklyn, the feeling of general malaise was in the air. And the second reason was that I wanted to go see Hamilton, and a new block of Hamilton tickets happened to go on sale that day.
Oh, there you go.
So I thought, what the heck? Why don't I shell out $400 and bought 2 tickets? And then, amusingly enough, a few months ago, Paul McCartney announced a tour with a whole bunch of shows in the tri-state area, and I thought, well, I could do one of these Tuesday shows at Barclays Center, which is down the road from me in Brooklyn. And I bought tickets for Tuesday, September 19th, not realizing at the time
you already had Hamilton tickets.
September 19th, I already had Hamilton tickets. So I managed to, a couple of weeks before the show, sell the McCartney tickets to my aunt and uncle, and then I bought McCartney tickets for a show in New Jersey the week before Hamilton, and I bought the tickets the day of, and we somehow paid $90 and we're on the floor for McCartney. So yeah, I've lived a charmed life over the past couple of weeks.
That's something.
It's something. Yeah, I mean, it creatively and artistically, I feel rejuvenated. Financially, I may have some issues that I'm not addressing right now. Well, paying for McCartney and Hamilton tickets
and dog food.
Hansen.
And dog food.
And dog food, yes, more so than anything, dog food.
Well,
for some reason,
and dog, because those aren't cheap.
Yeah, well, I just got a dog, and my girlfriend decided that we needed, I think, 7 different types of treats.
Well, obviously, they know the difference.
Right. Yes, they're quite perceptive. I tried to feed him the other day, and he said, "No, excuse me, I'd rather have the salmon smoked ones, please."
I mean, essentially, that's what winds up happening. Like,
yeah.
Why has he not eaten those 6?
One of them's for when we want to go to bed. One's for when we're training. One's for when we're out on walks. One of them is a treat that apparently cleans his teeth, which I think they should make for humans.
That'd be huge.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about the other 3. I don't think we've used those yet.
That seems like a Shark Tank space that's been untapped.
Cleaning treats for humans.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a winning proposal.
I feel like Mr. Wonderful wouldn't be all in on that, but
no, maybe you get Cuban to invest in 10% of the company though,
for $100,000.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking for a 10% stake, $100,000 human cleaning treat business. It wouldn't be the weirdest idea that I've ever seen on Shark Tank, though.
No, I saw a guy who had no product. He just had an idea to create a pill that would change your skin to like different colors for Halloween. So that you could be like a witch or a carrot or a Smurf by using excessive amounts of beta-carotene, and it didn't go well.
That is the start of a really bad sci-fi movie. I have a pill that will change your skin blue, and it definitely won't have any permanent lasting impacts.
That's how the Beast, I think, came to be in X-Men, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. On that note, can we talk creativity? I think
Sure.
to start, where do you, and I guess this extends to another level with Benetti as well, aforementioned. Where do you guys come up with stuff that you've done on the air? And I guess this is more a baseball thing, but Sox math for him, or teammates in a hat or teammates in a glove that you guys did, and talking bobblehead video, all that stuff.
I don't really write anything down. I just have a strange mind. Where does it come from is a good question. I think, first of all, I'm just lucky in that I have a good mind. My parents are smart. I have a pretty smart family. I guess there's something genetically in there. I was an obsessive reader as a kid. My parents, my mom in particular, didn't want me watching much TV, so I just became a vociferous reader. I just devoured. I probably read a book a day when I was growing up. There are untold numbers of times where I just would be late coming downstairs to dinner or late getting out of the car because I just wanted to read 6 more pages in whatever book I had. And as I've gone on, I just find myself naturally interested in other things. Once I went to college, I started really deep diving into movies and then television from there. In high school, I went from somebody that didn't listen to music to deep diving into all sorts of music. I'll listen to, U2, and then I'll immediately turn around and listen to Chance the Rapper or Kanye West, and then I'll turn around and listen to Johnny Cash and then Blink-182. Like I just, for whatever reason, I'm interested. I think I'm a curious person, so I'm just naturally interested in things, and I'm interested in the creative process too. I saw Hamilton, and then I immediately wanted to watch the Hamilton PBS documentary, and then I immediately wanted to watch an interview from Lin-Manuel Miranda on CBS Sunday morning, and then I wanted to listen to a podcast with the creators of Dear Evan Hansen. I want to know how people make things and where they get inspiration from. So I guess I'm just always thinking about that. I'm thinking about the creative process. I like knowing how people came up with song lyrics and melodies, even though I'm not particularly musically inclined. I play the piano a little bit, but that's it. I like knowing how people come up with story ideas. Where do they come up with story ideas? What are the settings in which they find their mind best works? Is it early in the morning? Is it late at night? Does it help to be carrying around a notebook? But I don't write most of this stuff down. I think it's just an accumulation of ideas and a general thinking about the creative process. And maybe I will start writing more stuff down. But for now, it's just, you mentioned talking bobblehead video. That came from, I did a video 2 years ago with the Syracuse Chiefs, the baseball team I worked for, where we had a garden gnome kind of bobblehead of our manager. And I think I was just watching one too many 90s David Letterman clips on YouTube. And I got the idea, what if I interviewed the garden gnome, and off camera, one of our team employees voiced over the garden gnome? And people enjoyed it, and I don't know why or how that idea popped into my head. Other than that, it seems like something Letterman would have done. And I go down these Letterman late night Conan O'Brien, even further back Johnny Carson rabbit holes. And it just popped into my head, like, this would be a weird, silly idea that probably 70% of the people wouldn't understand. The other 30% would think are funny. And I guess I like existing in that 30% sweet spot.
How does that make you a better broadcaster? Or does it make you a better broadcaster?
Well, I think it does. I think so much of broadcasting is essentially improv. I actually took an improv class a couple of years ago. And
after college?
Yeah, it was after college. It was in Syracuse. I was up in Syracuse for most of one off season doing high school and college sports on TV there, and I had a bunch of free time. And it's something that I would like to get back into. It's just a little tougher now because I don't have quite as much free time. And obviously, I live in Brooklyn. If you want to do improv in the city, it'll cost a pretty penny. But it's something that's on the forefront of my mind. I just haven't committed yet. I think it was one of the best things I've done because broadcasting is improvisation in a way. You can prepare, you can have information on players, but then the first play of the game, the star running back goes down. Oh gosh, what do I do now? You know, some wide receiver that was sixth on your depth chart makes a couple of 65-yard catches, or there's a lateral in the middle of a play. Or in baseball, a pitcher with a 7.5 ERA has a perfect game going into the eighth inning. You never know what's going to happen. You know who the players are. You know what the information is, but you don't know what's going to happen in a certain call. You don't know how the weather is going to impact the game. You don't know how the wind's going to impact the game. I mean, there's so many variables. And improv, in a way, is a little like that. And there's less in terms of prepared material that goes into it. You have to be prepared in knowing how it works. You know, you don't go into an improv scene thinking these are the three things I want to get in. Although in a sports game, you might do that. These are the three topics we want to hit. We want to layer this guy's story. But in improv, you have to know the rules, essentially. And then you can go into a scene and just kind of fly by the seat of your pants. I don't know what anybody's going to say next to me either. You know, I work with Jason for 4 years doing baseball, and you never knew what he was going to say. So you've always got to be on your toes in that scenario. The people I work with now, you know, for ESPN, often you'll meet somebody the day before a game. You go out to dinner with them, and the next day you're on the air, and you have to act like you're best friends for 2-3 hours. How do you do that? How do you anticipate what they're going to say? And there's not really a way to anticipate that. Maybe watch a game or two of theirs, but until you're there in person, you don't get it. So I just like the feeling of being able to come up with something on the fly. I think everybody that's in play-by-play would benefit from improv class. I just think it makes you smarter. It makes your brain work a little differently. I've never been quite as terrified as I was when we finished that improv class with a student show. The group of us that took this class went on before one of the actual troupes at the theater, and we did 15 minutes of improv, maybe 20, and it felt like an hour. We did 3 games. There is no game I've ever done. I've been fortunate to do games at Yankee Stadium in college and Fenway Park. The Chiefs played there and on ESPN. I've never even been a third as nervous as I was to do this improv show in front of 70 people. It was absolutely terrifying, and it was thrilling. It was probably as rewarding as any show I've ever done, even though a fraction of the audience that I have saw it. But I recommend it to everybody. It's an amazing thing to do creatively, and it's a good fear to get over too, in case I'm ever in a spot like that again.
How do you get used to working with people? Now that you bring it up, do you watch people's games? Like, what's that process like of getting to know somebody in a day?
I do watch games. So let's say working with, let's say last year, I did a game with Adrian Branch for basketball. All right, so we have a whole master schedule for college basketball with ESPN that you can go into. All right, when's the last Adrian Branch game? And I'll watch 15, 20 minutes. I want to get an idea of how people approach calling a game. Not necessarily like what are they necessarily looking for in the players. It's more of when do they speak? What are the topics that seem to excite them? Do they take it to break? Do they take the game out of break? How often do they speak? So I want to have at least general idea. And I worked with Al Groh last year, who knows more football than anybody I think I've met. But the question was, how do you get Al to do that within 20 or 30 seconds in between plays? And then the next week I did a game with Clint Sterner, who played quarterback at Arkansas and was pretty much in the studio all year. And I think maybe had done one game before that. And then basketball with Adrian Branch. I was with Sean Farnham for a game. I was with Paul Biancardi, who's ESPN's recruiting analyst. And there's so many different people. Everybody's such a different personality. So if I can watch a little bit, then I will do that. The other thing is I just ask questions. I don't know. I'm a curious person, as I've noted previously, and I'm inquisitive. I like trying to get to know people away from the sport. That's partly, I think, selfish in terms of trying to build chemistry before we get on the air. And partly it's just because I'm interested in people. I just generally like talking to people and like getting to know people. That's not a fabrication, but you have to fabricate it a little bit on the air when you've known somebody for maybe 14 hours before you go on and do a game. So I find it's instructive to try to get people to know you and try to get to know them and try to just develop a general likability. Because I think if the other person likes you, that subconsciously comes across on the air. I think if somebody is comfortable enough to joke around with you, then they'll be good. Whether or not they do, you don't have to. Not everybody's jokey on the air. Not everybody's as self-deprecating as me. That's okay. But if you can be off the air, if you have the capability to be, I just think it sounds more likable. That may be a totally cockamamie theory, but it is one that I've developed. I think the people that you can sit down and talk about life with off the air are the people that are better when you ask them a question about the 4-2-5 defensive scheme on the air.
What's it like working with Benetti in that regard? What was it like as a training ground for you? Yeah. I say I got my graduate degree in broadcasting from working with Jason. I graduated Syracuse in 2011, and I started working with the Chiefs that year. And I did 4 years of minor league baseball with Jason before he left and went on to ESPN. And every day is like graduate school with him. Just the way his mind works. The thing that Jason probably taught me on the air more than anything is a lot of people can go from point A to point B. Not everybody can go from point A to point C or from point A to point D, which he does. Identify the obvious connection and then find the not so obvious connection. The other thing I learned from working with Jason is just how to handle yourself off the air. When you're doing minor league baseball with someone, you are in it. I mean, it is, the grind is the word that people use. It is every bit of that and more than people that have not worked in minor league baseball know. You're around somebody constantly. You're doing 144 games with another person in 152 days. For the two of us, we were rooming together in Syracuse. I just moved into the second bedroom in his apartment for the summers. And then we rooming together on the road. A lot of teams, the broadcasters will have separate rooms, but with Syracuse, they always have the broadcasters room together. So you're spending most every second of every day with somebody for 6 months, to the point where that person can impact your life and the way you think more than anyone else. And I always say this, outside of my mom and dad, I probably haven't learned as much from any individual person as Jason's, because for 4 years, for baseball season, I'm with him every day. And you see how he operates in every situation. It was tough for the first year because I was this 21-year-old kid out of college who thought he knew everything. Here I am, first professional job. I'm going to be doing AAA baseball. It's great. I know what I'm doing, obviously, or I wouldn't have this job. And you learn quickly that you don't know anything.
you really don't have a clue what you're doing when you come out of college. And he expected a lot of me, and I was not living up to expectations. I was trying to enjoy the end of college while doing this job. I was trying to show up a little bit late, cut a few more corners, and it probably took until about August that year when I realized, I'm not doing this the right way. And then the last month of the season was far more fulfilling than anything that came before. And we just became fast friends, and he's still one of my closest friends. And the impact he had on me on the air is probably equivalent to, but maybe less than, the impact off the air.
Tell me about the on the air first, because I remember I tuned into a Chiefs game one time. I don't remember when. This was several years ago, and I'm listening, and I'm like, wow, Jason sounds pretty good. And then Jason started talking, and I was like, that must be Kevin. In terms of stylistically and kind of what he taught you, and I mean, you guys do sound very similar in a lot of ways, and that's a very good thing, obviously, because you're both at a very high level. What's he taught you, and how did he help mold you into what you are?
The weird thing is I never heard that, but probably starting in 2013 and going on into 2014. I'm serious. In 2013 and 14, which are the third and fourth years I work with him, like every week somebody said to me, I can't tell you two apart. I just thought that's ridiculous. Of course you can. We don't sound anything alike. But more and more people kept saying it, to the degree where, herd mentality is not always correct, but I think it was probably true in hindsight, because enough people that I respect and enough people with a good ear were saying it. So a lot of that was just subconscious. I never went out into a show thinking I'm going to sound like Jason. I think it just happened from soaking up the things he did. In terms of the X's and O's and the individual things that he taught me on the air. Well, I'd say the first is just don't be afraid to be smart and to sound smart. I think there can be a natural inclination to try to do an all-encompassing show and do a broadcast that the lowest common denominator a viewer can understand. And I don't say that to disparage viewers, but people do baseball games and they say, here's such and such player with a 260 average, 13 home runs, and 70 RBIs. And we're smart enough now as baseball fans to know that tells you nothing about that player. We don't know how much he gets on base. We don't know how many doubles he's hit. We don't know what his speed is. We don't know what kind of a fielder he is. We don't know how he is against lefties and against righties. I mean, we're so much smarter now. And yet if you listen to baseball broadcasts, and if you listen to a lot of major league broadcasts, a lot of people that I think are really good, have good voices, or know the game well, will say, here's this hitter, 260, 13 homers, 70 RBIs. And the thing that Jason taught me in that respect is you don't have to do that. You don't have to pander to everyone. There are going to be things that you say on the air if you're doing a smart show that not everyone's going to understand. You're going to say something that is going to fly over the head of half the audience. And that half of the audience is going to say, oh, all right, and then move on. If you do the rest of the game well, then they'll say, oh, I didn't get that. And then it'll evaporate, and they'll just keep on rolling with you. And the half of the audience that does get it is going to feel a little bit smarter and say, oh, I learned something there. And you shouldn't be afraid to alienate the other half of the audience with something that you think is educational or informative or funny, even if it doesn't hit everyone. Just technically, boy, I learned a lot about my voice from him. If you went back and listened to my work from 6 years ago, I'm 21 going on 14. Now I have this heinous Long Island accent where I'm hitting certain sounds. I'm saying Alaska instead of Alaska. I'm saying Maldonado instead of Maldonado. I'm saying bowl. I'm drawing out the WL in that word. And he kind of beat it out of me. It was a lot of just reading out loud to myself off the air, reading a paragraph in a book at a very low tone, reading at a very high tone. Come back on the air for a half inning and have a higher pitch, come back with a lower pitch, and see if you start at a sort of a lower floor vocally, where you can go from there. I mean, that's as much as anything, as much as we in play-by-play love to talk about how to call a game and what elements to get in and how to approach a certain big call and with words. I mean, so much of it is voice. We know that. There are people that are very smart and very capable and very talented that don't have quite the power in their voice and have probably slipped a little bit in their career because of it. And there are people that have outstanding voices that often get by because of a great natural voice. And while we can scream and shout and say that's unfair, the truth is that's a good portion of what people are listening for. People are listening for the voice, and I didn't have that. And to whatever extent I do now, and I'm still working on it, it's because of the way that I work with him. And he heard, I don't know how he did, but he heard, here's somebody that could do this, that has the potential to be strong vocally and hasn't accessed it now. Okay, how do we get him to access it? And that, as much as anything, has helped my career.
What was that? I mean, did you get coaching during that, or was it just kind of working it out on your own? Or, I mean, like, Jason is going to laugh at this conversation between you and I based on the conversations that he and I have had in that regard. But take me through that process.
Yeah, it was just working it out on my own. I've thought about it before. I've thought about getting a vocal coach. I've thought, I wonder what working with a vocal coach would be like. I'm curious, too, as to – I haven't done this. I don't know anybody that has, but I'm curious as to what would happen if somebody doing play-by-play worked with specifically a singing coach. I wonder if those are different vocal muscles, or if there are techniques that could help you there. Goodness knows I can't sing, but it's
very embarrassing. I've gone that route, and it's very weird in a music school when people can walk past the door and you're like, stop it, I'm not a music student.
Oh, you've done that? You've tried singing lessons to see how it works?
I have. It was actually pretty helpful.
Interesting.
I'm not going to lie. Yeah, it was pretty helpful. And Jason's now going to laugh at this further.
No, I love this. I'm really curious about this, because this is another one of those projects that's on the front burner of my brain that I think I might want to do someday. Did you feel like it? I mean, are there certain exercises that you'll still use on the air that you got from the singing coach?
Yeah, no, 100%. And for me, it was more like I hated the idea of like physically changing how I talked in a certain degree, because I was fighting the battle between like being who I am and like, pretending that I sounded a different way and kind of going on that alteration, if that makes any sense at all.
Absolutely.
So like I went down this route with a singing coach at Indiana Wesleyan. It's a college north of here. And like we did a lot of singing exercises and vocal warm-ups and vocalises and all of that stuff. And it just came down to like breathing differently. And I mean, I talked nasally and, in the front of my nose and all of that, and how to talk from the back of your neck a little bit so that, you have a little bit more resonance. And I think, it helped. And it was funny. I remember like doing a basketball game at San Diego State like 3 years ago. And this was in the midst of when I was still like really heavily into all this stuff. I walked outside the arena and I'm like standing in the parking lot because I wanted to go somewhere where nobody could hear me. And I'm like doing these vocal warm-ups as like occasionally somebody would walk by me to like go into the game. And it was odd. But there was nowhere, like I wasn't going to do it in the media room. Some
sports writers try to eat his chili, and there's Joel just breathing oddly in the corner.
Yeah. So that's all definitely happened. But that was kind of the route that I went, and I don't know if they're ultimately the same thing. But
yeah, I don't know either. I think some of that stuff I've probably just stumbled onto by accident. But it's been, Jason, my first year in minor league baseball, sort of pushed me a certain way, and then it's just basically been me doing it self-taught after that.
Reading? Like you said, you read like out loud to do stuff?
Yeah, I would just pick up a random book and read it one paragraph one way and then read another paragraph another way. Mostly tone and trying to gain vocal resonance, do this one in a high pitch, do this one in a low pitch, but sometimes read this paragraph quickly and then take a paragraph and just draw out the words a little more slowly. And I still hear that when I'm watching back or listening back to my work. I think that's the number one thing that I self-critique is, all right, you're going a little bit too quick. And right now it's about 10 to 15% too quick. And I think that's because I've naturally been a fast talker in my life off the air, which is something I'm trying to break out of.
Yeah, me too.
And that I think is probably, if I can psychoanalyze myself, from growing up in a family, A, on Long Island, and B, where my mom's one of 8 and I'm one of 25 first cousins. And it's just a big Irish Catholic family, and you get together every week or other week because somebody has a birthday or somebody's getting married or somebody's graduating high school. And you've got to be on your toes because if you hesitate, someone's going to jump into the conversation and you're not going to get a word in edgewise. And then friends of mine on Long Island, I go home now and I try to have a conversation with them, and I'll be a little more deliberate. And it's like, bang, you can't get a word in, 20-minute monologue from somebody, which is just sort of the way that people on Long Island operate sometimes. They like to talk, and they like to talk quickly, and I did too. So I find myself self-restraining off the air, but sometimes that slips in, and I start going a little bit too quickly on the air. That's probably the thing I'm still the most self-critical of, but I don't know. I did that for 20 some odd years of my life. It's hard to fully break out of it. Every now and then it's going to slip in. More than the accent, thankfully. The accent is pretty much gone on the air. It's rare where I'll say something and I think, oh gosh, I'm from the South Shore of Long Island. But it's the speed at which I talk now, which I'm constantly fighting a battle with myself over.
Let's talk about speed of the business, if we can. If I can flip courses a little bit. Tell me about climbing the ladder at ESPN and fairly quickly, and what it's been like for you. I guess since when was your first one? 15 was when you kind of started.
Yeah, 2015. I started doing some ESPN3 work. And then I broke in a little bit randomly with college hockey. So
I was going to say, like, maybe this is just me, but like, I never knew you to be a huge hockey person. Am I wrong on that?
No, I really wasn't. I'm a fan of the sport, but not to the degree. Growing up, I was more of a fan of football, basketball, and baseball because my dad is a big fan of football, basketball, and baseball. And more so football and baseball. Basketball, I had to get a little bit more organically on my own. I played the sport, so that helped. I never played hockey, so and I didn't follow it quite as closely as the other three. And the opportunities for hockey are a little more limited. I started doing hockey when I was out of college, doing games for Time Warner up in Syracuse, which broadcasts Colgate hockey games. Time Warner in Albany, I did a few games for RPI. Had a couple of games there. I can't think of the other one right now. I did an RPI game. I did a Cornell game against somebody too, I guess. State high school hockey championship. So just a handful of hockey games every year. So fast forward, and I should say I did some high school hockey for MSG Varsity on Long Island as well. So fast forward to 2015. The Chiefs the Chiefs were in Durham. We had already been to Charlotte, and for whatever reason, I hadn't made it out to the ESPN Charlotte offices. So I thought, I'm in North Carolina, I might as well do this. So I rented a car in Durham, drove to Charlotte, met with John Vassallo, who's one of the coordinating producers at ESPN, and John and I sat down, and he asked me, all right, what have you done? And I just started listing out things I'd done. I said, all right, I've done baseball, I've done football, I've done basketball, I've done hockey. And something clicked, and he stopped, and he said, we don't have that many people that have done hockey. And I hadn't done a ton of it. I'd done a handful of games every year. I thought I was getting better at it. I thought it fit me well.
I've also done boggle and field hockey and tiddlywinks. And
yeah, you should really hear my tiddlywinks. Not to prop myself up, but I am good. I think in the world of tiddlywinks, I think I'm at least among the top 3. So yeah, it's Al Michaels,
Jim Nance. And you.
Jim Nance. Beth Mullins is really good at tiddlywinks. Adam Amin has a lot on his plate. He did a tiddlywinks match last week on ESPN 8. I mean, you should check that out too. And then it's me. So JV said, not that many people that do hockey. Maybe we can work you in if you'd be interested. I said, yeah, of course. So we had a good conversation. I end up getting booked to do an ESPN 3 football game at Louisiana Lafayette, which was rebranding itself to just go by Louisiana,
Lafayette.
But we were still
Louisiana, that's
Louisiana Lafayette. Yeah. And I think now they've won. I think now they're just Louisiana on our family networks, if I'm not mistaken.
They
might be.
No, they are.
I'm right. Okay. That's good. So something I've said on this podcast is true. And I sent JV a stretch in the game, and I just said, hey, if you wouldn't mind watching this, I did my first ESPN 3 football game. And he responded, great. Do you want to do these 2 ESPNU hockey games at Penn State? Like, yeah, sure. Of course. And at this point, I'm just expecting that maybe after a couple of months, he'll get back to me. He's busy. Maybe it'll take a little bit of time before he watches the football game. He immediately comes back and says, do you want to do these hockey games? All right, sure. To this day, I'm not sure how much of the football tape he watched, but he had the idea to get me on hockey. So
I hope it's none, because the story would just be great in 20 years.
I hope it's none too. And you know what? I bet it probably is. He probably just saw, oh, right, here's the email from this kid that said he does hockey. So I was putting out a couple of Penn State games on ESPNU. Those went well. ESPN the last couple of years has only done 6 Big Ten hockey games during the regular season. In 2015-16, John Bujagross did 2, Clay Matvick did 2, and I did 2. Completely randomly. So when the hockey tournament comes around, ESPN has all the rights. And there are 4 game sites. So John Bucharos gets a game site. Clay Matvick gets a game site. Alan Beswick got a game site, who was just around doing a whole bunch of different sports. And then because I had done hockey that year, I got a game site and worked with Billy Jaffe, who is an absolute genius. And we did the Albany Regional, and it went well. And then really spurred on by that tape, last year, again, I met with a couple of the right people and ended up doing somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 35 events for ESPN. And part of it, again, was just being in the right place at the right time. The Chiefs were in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and Pawtucket's an hour and a half, hour and 40 from Bristol. So we had a night game, and I had my car, and I emailed a couple of people at ESPN and said, hey, we're going to be in town. I'm going to be, essentially just around the corner, relatively speaking. Could I come in and pick your brain 15 minutes? So I met with Ed Placey, a couple of others, and Ed is the head of college football programming essentially at ESPN, and I sat down with Ed, and I thought it would be maybe a 15-minute conversation. It probably ended up being closer to an hour. Ed has had an amazing career and is responsible for a whole bunch of technical things on the screen and the number of timeouts on the bug and just the way the score bug has changed. And I really just sat there and peppered Ed with questions for the better part of an hour. And that was honestly it. And it was, again, partially self-motivated and trying to get to know somebody, but I was just genuinely interested in learning. I like being someone who can kind of remove myself from the craft of putting a game together and just being an interested viewer at how it's done while also being in it. So I wanted to know. And Ed and I had a good conversation, and a week later, I got a call from somebody at ESPN saying we'd like you to do the high school football package this year. And that came a little bit out of nowhere, but that spurred me on, and then I had some more work after that. And then that morphed into this year where I'm doing a high school package, and then I'm going to do some more things. And I'm now full-time with the company. So I left the Chiefs at the end of the year. But it really was just a couple of chance conversations and me mentioning that I liked hockey that got me the first break. And then I think Ed and Patrick Donaher at ESPN probably had somebody else in mind for the high school package. And I just happened to catch them at the right time when they were about to schedule games. And we happened to have some good conversations. And thankfully they were crazy enough to say, oh, let's throw Kevin into the mix here.
That's all kind of nuts when you think about it. Right place, right time, right questions.
Yeah, and I mean, and the fact that I was working for a minor league team that brought me within an hour and a half of Bristol.
Yeah.
And brought me, I went from Durham in 2015, and then subsequent years, whenever the Chiefs have gone to Charlotte, I'll just stop by the offices because they're 15 minutes from the hotel in Charlotte. So if I was working on the Pacific Coast League, or if I was working in the Southern League, or the Texas League, I mean, I never would have had that chance.
No, you'd be with the Pac-12 network right now, yeah.
Right. Which, maybe I should have been doing that, and I'd be calling you from San Diego. But it was lucky. It's lucky that I was in that league, and I was that close, and those people were in the office the days I was there. I could have been there on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, when we would have traveled in on Friday or something like that. It just worked out. I think the Pawtucket visit last year was like right at the end of June, and that's right about when the college football schedule gets put together. So yeah, I'm certainly, as everybody I think in this business is, fortunate to at some point have met the right people and said the right things at the right time. For all of us, it comes with a little bit of luck in some way, and I guess that's the good luck portion of it for me. The other half of the good luck portion being I didn't graduate college early. I couldn't have worked for a full season minor league team unless they were in the city where I was and happened to have an opening that year, and the Syracuse Chiefs had an opening that year.
What's it like calling games for ESPN too? This is
for ESPN 2 or for ESPN, TOO? Because tonight we are on ESPN 2, Denton and Ryan High School.
What's the difference between 2 and the regular? No, we started talking about this right off the top before we started rolling. Well, actually, after we started rolling, but I'll cut it out. The production,
the magic of podcast,
right? The production side of things. What's a game like for you in terms of how you prep, how they prep, how you collaboratively prep, and then how things unfold as a game goes? I know there's a lot to bite off there, but just kind of if you can give me the behind the scenes cross section of what it looks like.
Yeah, I just show up with a roster card and just wing it.
And there are some that probably do quite well.
You're right. And those people have gifts that I would like.
Yeah.
I guess. I'll give you the football answer because I'm in the midst of it right now. And football is definitely the most pregame prep heavy sport. I mean, basketball, you prepare things obviously, but there's only so much you can do in game. There's so much action where you kind of just roll the ball out and go. Hockey is fairly in-depth too, but at the same time, it's hard to layer a player's story during a hockey game. Let's say this player has a particularly strong check, and then the puck is knocked out of play. Okay, in the 20 seconds before the face-off, we can cram in some stuff about this guy. But once play starts, you really have to be on the puck. Football is, maybe in terms of the sports that I personally enjoy, I'd probably say basketball first. I like the flow and the rhythm of the game. I would probably say baseball a close second, and then football a close third. But the collaborative nature of doing one of these broadcasts is as fun as anything. So football, I probably don't prepare that much differently than anybody else. We have our boards.
By the way, I saw you tweeted a picture of one of your boards. It looks very familiar. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Which one was that? What did I tweet out?
It was a high school football, it looked like.
Okay.
And I recognized the template.
I have tweaked the template that you and I and many have used from WAER FM at Syracuse University, but I have not overhauled it. And every year I'm ready to overhaul it, and then life gets in the way. And this was going to be the summer where I was going to overhaul it because
you haven't even changed the font, by the way.
Well, I left the Chiefs a month early this year, and I was like, all right, I'm really going to now dig into overhauling these football charts.
Yeah, Cooper Black is unique. It's unique.
Yeah, Cooper Black.
I don't know why I chose
size
it.
32 numbers.
I don't know why I did it that way, but that's what the font is.
I don't know either, but it's still there. I'm looking at a Cooper Black chart right now. I've changed the other fonts, but I've left Cooper Black. But I was going to overhaul it this year, and then and this is a whole different road I have to go down. But I got called into a last-minute week of doing Nationals baseball, and then I was home for a few days, and then I was at a bachelor party, and then my girlfriend and I went on a 2-week West Coast vacation. And it never happened. So my chart's basically the same.
Okay, so anyway.
I wouldn't say my prep is drastically different from anyone. The actual doing of the game for high school football is probably a lot different than most college games. You know, you have your coach calls during the week on usually Tuesday for a Friday game, and you talk to both head coaches. For any college game I've done, it's a little bit less with the coaches. It's a little bit less, going through the roster, and it's more big picture thing because you know who everybody is, and there's information on all these guys. For a high school game, we're doing Denton High School and Ryan High School the day we're recording this in Denton, Texas. Now, how many players, Dilgada, can you name on Denton or Ryan High Schools in Texas?
Well, Denton is where the Rocky Horror Show took place, so Brad.
Is that really where the Rocky Horror Show took place?
I don't know if it's Denton, Texas, but it is Denton.
I don't think it is.
Yeah. None.
Yeah, so there is no Brad on the roster.
But your challenge is now to drop in some sort of...
That's right. And now I'm going to be furiously Googling Rocky Horror quotes once we get off the phone. So nobody knows who these guys are. Ryan has a quarterback who is an Oklahoma State commit and a wide receiver who's a Texas Tech commit. And that's really the main draw in this game. So we become a little bit of a studio show. We have to talk big picture recruiting in the nation. We will talk state of Texas recruiting. So in our production meeting today, we're talking about what are Texas Tech, A&M, TCU, Baylor, what are they doing on the recruiting trail? All right, tonight we're going to be really previewing this weekend of college football games. So we are going to be previewing Miami Duke and USC Washington State tomorrow, and then Clemson Virginia Tech Saturday. So off of those promos, we'll probably talk those schools' recruiting classes because that's something that we can do differently than other college games. We'll talk about why Clemson has had success in recruiting the last few years. We'll talk about the top quarterback in the country who we had on our airwaves the opening week, who is a Clemson commit. So I have to know about Billy Ryan's players. I have to know about Denton High School's players. I have to know something about Denton, Texas as an area, because not a lot of people know about some of these high school towns we go to. And I have to know how Spencer Sanders, the Ryan quarterback, is going to fit into Oklahoma State. I have to know his backstory, but I have to know Oklahoma State's quarterback depth chart. I have to know how his system or how he fits their system. I have to know how Gabe Douglas, this wide receiver, fits into Texas Tech system. It probably helps to know a little bit about Oklahoma State and Texas Tech's games this weekend, and they happen to be playing each other. I have to know about the state of Texas and the big picture recruiting there. Has the talent gotten better? Why are certain schools recruiting well in Texas? I have to know about Clemson recruiting and Virginia Tech recruiting because we're going to hit them. So high school football is a lot more all-encompassing. The charts in terms of individual player info are dramatically thinner than the college game, but the big picture topics we have to know are a lot bigger. So we approach the show a little bit differently in that way. We're not going to be the show that on a 4-yard run always tells you the left guard pulled. We're going to be a show that on a 4-yard run is going to tell you here's the left guard pulling, and it's not why he pulled, but hey, what are this left guard's strengths and weaknesses? He's a commit to Vanderbilt. He's a Kentucky commit. He's a Texas commit. How does he fit in there? What can he do to build up bulk at the next level? So a high school football game is a little bit of a different beast in that respect, in that we've got to be prepared for a whole bunch of different variations, not only on our game, but on how these players could fit into college at the next level. So it is a much different type of challenge. And I had no idea what it was like before getting into it last year. But it's great because it keeps me thinking about college football, even though I'm not doing it for the first 10 weeks or so of the year. I have to stay on my toes, and I have to listen to college football podcasts and watch games and watch shows and just know the big picture, because we are usually a Thursday or Friday show, and we're as much an appetizer for the big games as we are our own thing.
How much different is that from, and obviously the approach is different because the audience is different, but how much different would that be from a production standpoint from what you did for like a MSG Varsity or a Time Warner Cable?
Right. It is a huge overhaul in terms of, I mean, for MSG Varsity, that was, I think now it's News 12 Varsity. It's a different life.
I've moved away. I'm out of touch with the East Coast.
It is. I'm on the East Coast, and I'm partly out of touch with the East Coast. It's an online streaming channel to high school sports in the tri-state area, New York, Long Island, I think New Jersey, Connecticut to an extent. Most of the MSG Varsity games that I did were me, a camera person, and that's it. We'd bring a camera. The camera person would be known as the game producer, which is a really fancy way of saying this person that shoots the game. All right, so I make my charts. You get there, you go to the back of the bleachers usually. The very good game producers would find a table and, get there early and string their XLR cables from the top of the bleachers down to the table, because the camera's up at the top of the bleachers and you want to tape down the wires so you can put the table courtside. And you'd shoot the open maybe 30 minutes before the game. You'd go down on the field and shoot a pre-taped open with me and the camera person. All right, then let's go back up to the top. I'm sitting next to the camera person. I don't have an analyst. I'm doing the game sort of TV style, but sort of radio style, because all the graphics are going to be added in post-production. And, have fun. That's it. And sometimes you would, because you're responsible for all your own calls at that point, sometimes you'd call the school a bunch of times and the coach just wouldn't call you back. And you'd show up at the game and you'd show up early and try to sit down with the coach 2.5 hours beforehand and say, tell me about your team, because I don't know anything about them. So to go from that to Time Warner was a nice jump up. Time Warner maybe is about a 15-person show most of the time, maybe 20, 25, 30 before they made some cutbacks. And hey, you have an audio engineer in the truck. You've got an analyst. You might have a sideline reporter. You have a producer in your headset. You have 4 cameras. And the capabilities are somewhat limited in terms of graphics. For a Time Warner show, you're not sitting down and having a production meeting the night before. All right, you'll talk to the coaches during the week, you and the producer and the analyst, and then you show up 2 hours before the game and you do the game. This is obviously a different beast, and I'm sure, I know in fact other guests have hit on this, but you have a call Monday with the producer and the director and the analyst and the AP and the AD and the graphics person, and you talk about last week's game and the themes you want to hit during this game. You're talking to the coaches the next day. You're emailing ideas back and forth during the week. And sometimes the producer comes up with a brilliant idea, like last week, where one of the teams had a high school football player who ran the 6th fastest 100-meter dash in boys high school history. And our producer got the idea, why don't we have Kevin race this guy?
I'm sure that went well.
And we ran a 40-yard dash, and it did not go well for me. I ran a 5.5. I was embarrassed by it.
That's not bad, honestly.
Well, he ran a 4.7, and he said he was running at 3/4 speed. So we got that idea. We made it happen the day of the game, at 2:00 for a 7:00 game. We got out there, raced a couple of times. And then the question was, all right, now what are we going to do with this in the show? So I wanted to play it once and then keep it in the back pocket in case there was something else that happened. And as it so happened, Anthony Schwartz, this young man, in the second half catches a ball and goes 70 yards untouched. And so I'm like, we got to show the race. So here's the 70-yard play, and then you want to see his speed in the open field. Here's him coasting to a 4.7 40-yard dash after that. So that was something that just popped up during the week. The school was cool with it, and then on game day we had to figure out where's the best spot for it. And we ran it a couple of times, and it totally worked. I never could have done that with MSG. You never could have done that with Time Warner. I've always tried to prep individually the same, just because that's the way I'm wired. But the benefit of having other people that prep the same is just immeasurable. And to go from doing those shows to doing these, I think I have a really good appreciation for the absolute bare bones. And now I just feel like, in a good way, overwhelmed every week. Not overwhelmed to the degree where it hurts me. I'm just so happy that we have all these resources on a game. Extra cameras and extra people working in the truck and people that get information that you had to get yourself on a high school game. It's awesome because, again, I like being a fan of the craft and not just somebody in it. And it's really fun to watch all the wheels kind of roll into place.
I think we're pushing the bounds for like longest pod ever, but I don't mean it in a bad way because this has been good.
Amin had a two-parter, didn't he?
That's true. Somebody else. Oh, Pat Keenis had a two-parter also.
Patrick Keenis, yeah, I know Pat.
There's some International League pride there.
That's right. Only International League broadcasters and Adam Mean
get
does
two
every
parters.
sport. Yeah, get the long podcast.
I wanted to ask you about baseball before we wrap this up a little bit too, because I feel like I'd be negligent if I didn't. Your first major league game. Who did you work with for that game, by the way, this year?
That was this past year. I did 2 games with Dave Jagler, and then I did 6 with Charlie Slows.
So Dave was with you on radio.
Yes.
Okay, he didn't shift to TV at all.
So here's what happened. So in May, Charlie Slows' son Alex graduated from high school, and I filled in with Dave for 2 games in Pittsburgh. Then in July, end of July, beginning of August, Dave had to shift over late to do TV for a series. Bob Carpenter was on vacation for that series, and Dave ended up doing TV. Masson asked the Nationals radio people, hey, could Dave come do TV for this road trip? Said, sure. It was very last minute, and so I was asked to fill in for Dave on radio with Charlie. So Dave slid over to TV for 3 games at Miami, 3 games at Wrigley Field. And then very quickly, this all went down the night before my last game with the Chiefs. So it was Saturday night. My last game with the Chiefs was going to be on a Sunday. Obviously emotional weekend, 7 years with them. People said things way nicer than I deserved them to say. It was really a sweet final day. And, I'm emotionally ready for that and to be done with baseball and have some time off. And then 9:15 on Saturday night, I get an email from Dave London at the Nats. Hey, this is last minute. You think you could fill in Miami and Chicago Monday through Sunday? I'm like, well, this is good timing. So, yeah, I couldn't really tell anybody on Sunday that, hey, this is not the last baseball game I'm going to do even this week. But that's how that worked out. So Dave did TV, I did radio.
Which was the one where Gio almost threw the no-hitter?
That was my 3rd game. That was the first game of that trip in Miami. But I had done the 2 games in May, and so those are my first 2 major league games. So, yeah, my 3rd big league game, Gio took a no-hitter into the 9th in Miami on Jose Fernandez's birthday with Jose's family in attendance. And, yeah, I'm pinching myself the whole time, thinking, like, I can't believe I'm here.
Good Lord, don't screw this up.
Yeah, no kidding. I had the 3rd, 4th, and the 7th inning, so it wasn't like, in the 3rd and the 4th, you're not really thinking it.
But in the seventh, you're like...
In the seventh, you're thinking, oh, God, this really might happen. But I think in hindsight, looking back on it, I was calmer than I probably should have been. I really wasn't thinking, oh goodness, screw it up. I was just having fun, honestly. It was just a fun ride. I probably was still pitching myself. I can't believe I'm here.
What was your first
I
one?
thought I was done with baseball for the year. I'm just happy to be here.
What was your first one like?
It was also calmer than I expected. I've had some people tell me that when they went up to the big leagues, like they really had butterflies and, had trouble just like sleeping and those sorts of things. And I get that. And so I found out in January I was doing the games and kept it under my hat until May. And that whole time, the whole 3 months in between, I said to myself, well, you know what? You're going to be a bundle of nerves and you're going to be anxious when you get on the air, and that's fine. And I think I actually reverse jinxed myself. I was so convinced that I would be nervous and I would be anxious because it would be my first big league game. I was so convinced by it that I ended up not being. The one butterfly-inducing moment was walking into the press box and walking into the booth at PNC and seeing the skyline of Pittsburgh and the bridges and the overview of the field and thinking, oh, this is not Rochester. This isn't Scranton. But Dave is so good, and I know he was on the podcast a few weeks ago, and he's such a professional, and he's so well prepared, and he was the absolute perfect guy for me to be with because he just put me at ease right away. We recorded a couple of pregame segments that were pre-taped before the game, which was good. That my first on-air experience with the Nationals was not live. Got those out of the way. Once the game started, it was just doing baseball with a few more people in the stadium. I know that sounds a little crazy, and I'm a little surprised that it was that way because I was so psyched up that it wouldn't be that way. But it was the combination, I think, of overdoing it in my mind beforehand and then being with Dave where the game started and I said, all right, this is fine. This is baseball.
Last thing. Your Twitter says that you're a former Cabana boy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate?
Of course it's accurate. Why would I lie in my Twitter bio?
I don't know.
Who am I? What do you think of me, Joe?
Where would this have been?
Yeah, so my first job was to work at Sun and Surf Beach Club in Atlantic Beach, New York, on Long Island. And if you go down to Long Beach and you make a left, you go to Point Lookout until you can't go any further. And if you go to the right, and then you go to Atlantic Beach until you can't go any further. I had a couple of people I knew, a cousin, a friend that worked at the beach club. I was in high school. I needed something to do. So I worked there for 5 years in summers in high school and college. You start out working as a runner. You sit up at the front of the club. People come up with food, drinks, beach chairs, et cetera, et cetera. They need to bring it to their lockers or cabanas. You put it on a dolly. It's sort of like Tetris. You stack everything so you can get it all to fit. And then you wheel these awfully squeaky, poorly painted, chipping away blue carts through the occasionally uneven wooden bumps in the club. You wheel them to their cabanas or their lockers. You unpack. You get maybe a $3 tip. And you do that for a year. And then the second year, you get to actually work as a relief cabana boy. And you go to a row of cabanas, 20, 26 or so, and you get there early. You open them up in the morning. You put out the chair cushions. You put out the flags. You fill their water buckets. The big thing is you take their chairs and their umbrellas and tables down to the beach. At the end of the day, you bring a cart and you lug everything back up. You get tipped at the end of the week. By the third year, you become a full-time cabana boy. You have your own row of cabanas. You build relationships with these people. you make pretty good money for being in high school. Sometimes people will tip you $20 a week, and sometimes they'll tip you $100 a week. It was an amazing summer job. I complained about it at times during the job because you'd be working from like 8 a.m. to 7 or 8 p.m. on busy weekends. But looking back on it, I was at the beach 5 days a week. It was awesome. So I was a 5-year cabana boy, and I just felt that was appropriate enough to put on my Twitter. Because, what am I going to put? Likes music, broadcaster. Like, yeah, okay, everybody likes music. Not everybody was a former cabana boy. I think that sets me apart in life.
Well, I just think it puts you in a certain class of people when you can say former cabana boy. Like, people just assume you have abs.
Well, not in the class of people that own the cabanas. I'm not in their class.
Fair.
I'm a measly peon.
I feel like you're going to wind up as like an extra now in some sort of Russell Brand movie as like a cabana boy. You've got that
I would
experience.
Sign up for that tomorrow. Where the spiritual sequel to Forgetting Sarah Marshall, what was that? Get Him to the Greek? Yeah, make him Get Him to the Greek too. And now Russell Brand's character owns a cabana. Yeah, I'm in. I'm game.
On that note, Kevin, how do people find you?
I'd rather they didn't, but if you must, my address in Brooklyn. No. If you're wandering around the Greenwood Cemetery, I should just
put in like a beep there to make it sound like you actually gave it out.
I should, yeah. Or you should, yeah. Let's see. On Twitter, I'm at Kevin N. Brown. No, my parents didn't get wonky and spell my name Kevinn. Yes, there are too many other Kevin Browns. My middle initial is N. In fact, my middle name is Noble, which is my mom's maiden name, which is always fun to explain to people that I'm Kevin Noble Brown and not because I'm trying to sound arrogant. I don't know. I'm on Instagram at, I think it's Noble Kevin. Again, not arrogant, family name. I'm on Snapchat, but I have no idea what my Snapchat handle is.
Nah, nobody does.
So, you know what? It's Brown Noble Kevin. Yeah, so it's reverse.
You're very creative.
Brown Noble Kevin on Snapchat. And how else can you find me? Yeah, I don't know. Wander around Brooklyn. If you're ever in Jalapeno King or Luigi's Pizza in Brooklyn, you might very well see me there.
There you go. That's a free plug. They didn't even pay for that.
That's right. Yeah. Not a sponsor.
Awesome. Kevin, thank you for doing this.
Listen, I just once I saw Cousins do the show, I knew I had to be next, and I'm glad that 38 interviews later, I could follow in his fine footsteps.
That's very Iron Eagle of you too, by the way, for just doing that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a homeless man's Iron Eagle on the air. I like to think of myself as. So, thanks for having me.
No, my pleasure. I continued rolling after we finished the podcast as well, and there was one point where Kevin said, this would have been a good story to include on the pod. So, I was recording anyway, so here it is.
I did. There's one MSG game we did. This was one of the rare MSG games, or I guess I should say MSG events. Right? One of the rare MSG events where I actually had an analyst was this wrestling meet. And the analyst showed up about an hour before the game. I'd been there for about an hour. We were going to be set up in the back of the bleachers as per usual. And the gentleman who was my analyst, and for the life of me, I don't remember his name, so I'm not throwing him under the bus because I don't know who he was. He demanded that the producer move us down to the mat. So the producer gave him some friction. He said, this will be tough technically. He said, we got to be at the mat. I can't be in the back of the stands. So the producer finds a table. He runs the wires down. We set up the table at the mat. We're ready to shoot the stand-up. As we start to shoot the stand-up, the meet begins. The first match takes place behind us as we're shooting the stand-up. So we have to stop because our producer, in his haste to do this, does not alert the officials that we're ready to go. So we scramble to get the second half of that particular match. We do the rest of the meet. We really can't hear each other that well on our headsets. And we find out the next day when our producer gets back in the studio that none of the audio is recorded. So we had to go back into the MSG studios over the video of the match, re-record the entire broadcast, pretending not to know what has happened when we know the result of every match. So that was probably the strangest thing I've done. And afterward, the analyst and the producer got together. They're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I did this." They tried to hash some stuff out, but it was very strange, and it showcased the technical limitations when none of the audio recorded that occasionally popped up when you had a 1 or 2 person and 1 camera shoot. So it's nice to be at ESPN.
All right, that is Kevin Brown joining us here on Play-by-Playcast of ESPN. You could have caught him last night, I guess, if you're listening to this on time, with the high school game of the week down in Texas that we talked about a little bit in this episode. But usually, if you want to catch him Friday nights, you can catch him on ESPN 2, maybe? I'm not sure exactly. I don't even know. My ESPN channels are out of whack. I get ESPN, ESPN News, ESPNU, ESPN2 in that order on my cable. So I don't know which one's which. I just scroll through them. But one of those stations you can catch Kevin on every week for the high school game of the week. He gave you the information to find him on social media as well, any variation of Kevin Noble Brown. And again, you can hit the podcast up on social media as always, at PxPcast, or I am at Joel Godet. Do, if you feel so inclined, leave us a rating and or a review. Let people know that you enjoy the podcast. Help spread the word about Play-by-Playcast as we continue to grow this thing going forward. We're about out of time, though, because it was a long one this week, but I'm glad that we could spend more time with Kevin and with our guests than me rambling to you. So until next week, next Friday, here on Play-by-Playcast, I can't even talk anymore. We are out! Thanks to Kevin Brown. Thanks to you. My name is Joel. This is The Pod.
And that will do it from St. Louis, where the score is inconclusive.